Good afternoon, folks. Welcome back to part two of our day-long webinar series commemorating the 10th year of the PoSH Act. We had an incredible start of the day with Kavita Srivastav, co-founder of Vishaka, and Bhavri Devi joining us to take us through the incredible journey that led to the famous Vishaka judgment and the subsequent passage of the PoSH law. I can tell you, I personally was very, very overwhelmed after sort of the 1.5 hour session. We talk about it a lot, but to actually experience it through the people who actually fought for it is a different feeling altogether. You really feel like you're traversing the hard path that they took 30 odd years ago to get us to a better world today. So the law has now been in force for 10 years, and the community that's been at the forefront of implementing the law has been the HR community. Creating the right culture within an organization, implementing the law, both of these have increasingly become a very high priority now for most organizations. So today, I'm joined by two experienced HR professionals who will share their insights gathered through their respective professional journeys. Our first panelist for our second session today on the best practices in implementing PoSH policies is Kashmira Prabhu. Welcome, Kashmira.
Thank you so much.
Kashmira is an accomplished HR professional with extensive experience and expertise in talent management, learning and development, and organizational development. She is currently serving as head of HR at Nosil Limited and brings over a decade of rich experience in shaping human resources strategies for diverse industries. She's previously worked at Polycab India Limited, GSK Pharmaceuticals India, and BASF. With a robust background in various HR leadership positions, she has adeptly managed talent acquisition, performance management, competency development, and change management initiatives. Kashmira holds a PGDBA in Human Resources from KJ Somaya Institute of Management Studies, complementing a bachelor's in commerce from Narsi Monji College. So welcome to our session once again, Kashmira. Thank you so much for joining us. Delighted to have you and look forward to a really enriching session.
Same here.
Our second panelist is Delna Elavia. Delna is an accomplished HR professional with over a decade of diverse experience across multiple sectors, including events, pharmacy, hospitality, spas, and retail. She specializes in working with people, leveraging her deep understanding of behavior to drive positive change and empowerment. Currently serving as the country head of human resources for the Estee Lauder companies in India, Delna has been instrumental in leading the HR function for the brands under Estee Lauder, including Clinique, MAC, MAC, Bobbi Brown, Jo Malone London, Smashbox, Glam Glow, and Tom Ford. Delna, I should tell you that there are a lot of people in our office who are very excited that we are having you on today's webinar. So, Delna has previously worked at the Taj Hotel Resorts and Jiva Spas. Delna has an MBA in Human Resources Management, Personal Administration from Wellington Institute of Management, and a Bachelor of Laws in an LLB in Corporate Law from KC Law College. Delna possesses a unique blend of strategic HR expertise and legal acumen. Welcome, Delna. Thank you so much for joining us. And I should also add that it's always a delight to meet a fellow lawyer, even though you are now more focused on the HR side of things, but always love having lawyers on the panel as well. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to the discussion.
So today's the sort of discussion is going to be focused really on sort of best practices in implementing PoSH policies, right? HR, as I had mentioned previously, is really at the forefront of taking the policy, rolling it out, training, pretty much the whole 9 yards, right? So what we'd like to really sort of focus on today is what's that been like? And both of you as professionals, your experience, with prevention of sexual harassment before the PoSH law of 2013 and as well as post the law, how has that shaped up or how has that panned out rather? So we could start with maybe in terms of the fundamental compliance aspects of the PoSH law, right? So, and we'll move into the softer aspects, in a bit. but the compliance aspects, right? Every company needs to set up an internal committee. The constitution of the committee has to be in a particular fashion. The committee has to be empowered to hear cases, adjudicate on them. They have to be trained. The employees have to be trained. Annual reports have to be filed. I mean, the list, I could go on and on. But uh, if we could just sort of start off by saying, what's been your experience as HR professionals? How is the compliance piece sort of worked out? Are organizations today, 10 years, post the law having been passed in 2013, are we at a place where we can sort of safely say yes, PoSH law in place, check, all corporates are sort of doing whatever it is they need to do, and of course, while we can never fully eliminate sexual harassment at the workplace, at least we have done enough to mitigate and possibly train and create awareness and sensitize the workforce with respect to sexual harassment, and possibly the penalties and so on and so forth with respect to that. So if you could just, sort of kickstart our discussion with respect to both of your experiences. Kashmira, maybe we could, sort of get you in first. How has that experience been for you as an HR professional, and what you've seen over the years in terms of PoSH compliance?
Yeah, so Anthony, one thing which I feel when I look back and this question really makes one reflect is it all starts with leadership intent. I feel like though HR is of course the enabler and the facilitator over here, what I have experienced is when there's a strong leadership intent, and whether that comes from your group company, global, regional, or the promoter philosophy. So it has to have a real strong leadership intent, and then it goes beyond just being a tick box activity. So I think that's one thing which is really important, that that is what really drives this initiative. And of course, what I have experienced is that yes, companies are definitely doing what is expected. And that's a double-edged sword, because one thing is that you follow the act and you do exactly what the act, really expects from you. And second is you want to go beyond the act and do what is right for your people and the organization or the ecosystem, whether your vendors, suppliers, etc. So I definitely feel there is a lot more organizations, especially those who are established, who have set processes, can go beyond the act and set benchmarks. So there I feel there is a lot of runway, and including myself, I mean, all of us need to really make up our minds that though the act says X, now we have done it for so many years, we really need to see what is next. What can we do next, because there's a lot of change in our environment. So one is, of course, it's a global environment, it's a virtual environment, you have a multi-generational workforce. So what seemed bad to us may be a very different perspective from someone coming from the new age generation. So we have to take all this into consideration and really revisit, what will be most appropriate for our organization and its ecosystem. So that's where I am. And this whole session has made me also reflect, because all this while, and I have to be honest, we have been really doing what is expected with the right intent, with the right mindset, at least the people who are implementing it, and then of course the recipients of it. However, means we have really never discussed that is this enough today? Is there something more that all of us need to collectively do, because 10 years have passed and everything is certain, real time. A lot of things have changed, the ways of working, who's coming to work, who are you working with. So I think yes, there is scope, especially if I look at my organization's ecosystem. So you work with a lot of customers who are MNCs, who are based in different countries. You have a lot of vendors who are based. So your PoSH training cannot only be restricted to what is good or what is needed in India, because your ecosystem extends beyond that.
Correct.
You have to keep in mind all these aspects. So I think, yes, there's a lot more we can do. However, having said that, really thankful for all the people who really pushed this forward, because I have worked earlier also when we didn't have the act. So I started my career in 2005. And definitely bringing the act to life has made things, I would say, much more easier, or much more sort of inclusive, in a way that you feel more safer at the workplace, because you have something that you could leverage or rely on if you need. So from that perspective, really good that we did this. It was great for all the efforts that people put in for this. But however, it's our responsibility to see what next and to take it forward. So that's
absolutely, Kashmir, and thank you so much. And I want you to two words that you used, safer workplaces and inclusion. or inclusivity. And we will be coming to that soon, because we all believe that it is a very integral part of also PoSH compliance, right? If you create an inclusive and respectful workplace. So yes, we are definitely taking that up in a bit. But I think the first point that you made was very powerful: leadership intent. And I think that is a very significant part of whether you are a company that's not complying with the law, you're a company that is complying just about, yeah, okay, the law says these 10 things, I'm going to just check the box, be done with it. Or if you are taking it forward in letter and in spirit, and you really want to make a change at the workplace, right? It all starts from the top, right? So leadership, whether it's government or whether it's corporation, it's all flows top down in a sense. The culture is set at the top, the expectations are set at the top, and most importantly, behavior is set at the top, right? So how leaders behave is how the rest of the organization will watch them and really learn and say, okay, this is how uh, you know uh, everybody is expected to conduct themselves. People follow leaders, and leaders have to set by example. So definitely, leadership intent is something that increasingly, I think, more and more leaders are now realizing that it's important not just to pay lip service to the PoSH law, but but to actually go over and beyond that, and sort of really make a tangible difference and lead by example. So very powerful sort of statement, if I may say, Kashmira, because that is really, that's the tone has to be set at the top, and then you'll find that the organization sort of follows. Delna, your experience, particularly from a compliance perspective, and you also have the sort of additional qualification of being a lawyer, so you wear both hats, that of an HR professional and of a lawyer. PoSH is an interesting law that kind of implementation of laws normally doesn't sit with HR, right? It normally sits with probably legal or compliance. But PoSH is one of those very, very interesting laws where HR has been tasked with, because primarily because it has so much to do with people, tasked with sort of taking it forward in most organizations. What's your experience been like?
So I think before we go into what the experience is, I think the first thing I would think of is in the organizations I've worked, right? Before it became a law as well, most of our policies already had, in a way,
Yes.
a harassment clause, right? So everyone did have that to say that this certain behaviors as part of your code of conduct is not allowed at the workplace.
Yes.
I think what the PoSH law did was enforced it, and I think the country it here, right? We saw the law, and as all laws
Delna,
are,
we lost you briefly for about 10 seconds. If I could request you,
when
I don't know if it was only me or everybody else, but
We couldn't see that. Just
10
the
seconds, yeah.
last part.
okay, so I think when I go back, like I was saying, it was always part of our code of conduct, whether it was in the
Yes.
Taj Group or any of the companies, it was always part. What the law did is it enforced it, and I think that was essential for smaller companies as well. Like if you are a listed company, if you're a large MNC, it's natural that you will already have this as part of your processes. May not be a law, but it was already there. I think what it did was it empowered HR and leadership to put this in place also in smaller companies, in companies that are not in the organized sector, to protect women at the workplace. And I think that is the big change that happened across with this law, which is really recommended. And that was necessary, because there, especially if you are owner driven, like taking back to leadership, if you are an owner driven organization where you think this is not important, HR then feels powerless. The law has given HR power to be able to implement and do the right thing and to protect women. Also, when I think back when the law came out in December, and I think most companies, by the time we started looking at it, it was 2014 at some point. We looked at the law and said, while it is only for women, if you are an equal opportunity employer, harassment has to be looked at more than just for women. So yes, women need protection at the workplace, but you have to equally protect everybody, all your genders at the workplace. So even when we implemented the law, our law protects women, but it also protects all genders, because all
gender
genders
inclusive policy.
It has to be a gender inclusive policy. We also went ahead to look at a zero tolerance policy, which means that then it cannot be that it doesn't depend on who did what, it depends on what was done. And so if there is zero tolerance, which is a double-edged sword, and it's a very difficult one to convince management and top management to live
I can
those
understand.
values if you put that ahead, right? But we have done that, and I think that the education around zero tolerance is very important. And the law cannot just be a tick mark. It's easy to do a tick mark. PoSH is more than just a law. It's about how do you create a more inclusive workplace for all. And as soon as you start working on the principles of inclusion, of diversity, of equity at the workplace, the law becomes more powerful because people are more aware, and awareness by itself deters people from conducting behavior that's not recommended at the workplace or anywhere. So I think that awareness along with the zero tolerance is critical for this piece.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more actually. And you're right. I think the comment that you made about why life is different post 2013 is because every organization or most organizations would have probably had an anti-sexual harassment provision or a policy in the code of conduct or a separate policy, but without the backing or teeth of statute or law, it then just becomes something that is at the discretion of every the management team in an organization or what have you, right? There is no compulsion to train your people, train your workforce. There's no compulsion to sensitize them. And we have seen, even not just in India, but globally, we have seen we've heard horror stories of how women have been treated at the workplace in organizations or countries where there is no law that actually prohibits sexual harassment at the workplace. So the law is definitely, from that perspective, there is a big and tangible change that has happened, because the minute you have the backing of the law, HR, management, everybody then has, those who want to sort of comply, want to take it forward. They have the teeth. They're now armed in a sense. You're armed with the law. There's nothing more powerful than a law passed in this country, backed by the Constitution and so on and so forth. So that really creates a big impact in terms of how it will be received by the workforce. So one thing is to have a policy. The other thing is to say, look, this is a policy that's backed by law and everybody has to comply. So that's the big change we have seen definitely over the last 10 years. But Delna, staying with you, is there anything else that you feel has been, a change from, let's say, pre 2013 and post 2013? How is there any other tangible change or difference that you have seen, apart from the fact that people are taking it more seriously? Sure. And remember, we also had 97 onwards, we also had a law. It's just not conventionally understood as law, but the Supreme Court, exercised its powers given to it under the Constitution to pass a judgment which said, until there is a specific law on this subject, this judgment, the Vishaka judgment, would be law. So the law did exist from 97 onwards, but some organizations had what was then popularly called the Vishaka Committee, but not all. And I think awareness remained significantly limited until we finally had the law in 2013. So yes, there was a law 97 onwards, but really nobody probably really paid much attention to it. I know a few of the larger and maybe more established organizations did have what they call Vishaka committees. So is there anything else that you have seen in your experience as an HR professional, pre 2013 and post? Any significant changes or differences?
I think this creation of a safe work environment did not exist. It was always taken for granted that there's a work environment and everybody is just doing what they're doing. The creation of the safe work environment and using that word, that safety at the workplace is important, came in only with this law. And I think that was a fundamental change, especially, Factories Act, all of our acts have some provisions.
Yes.
But this made it mandatory for everyone, whether you follow Shops and Establishment, you follow Factories Act, it doesn't matter. This particular law gave that overpowering, not just power, but like you said, it backed up what everyone needed to do. And it also brought this issue to the forefront. Earlier, maybe there were is the fact that you now need to also report, right? The fact that there's a committee. It means that employees also have to be made aware of the process. So you cannot also, even if the intents are not right, the person has a grievance redressal process that extends to outside of the organization, which is also empowering for individuals. Earlier, that didn't happen, right? You went, you complained to your line manager, you said something, they probably did or did not react to it depending on the nature of the complaint.
Correct.
But this also now, as an employee, you are more aware. So you know your rights. You know that if someone doesn't respond to you, there is a mechanism for you within the country that will support you if you raise a grievance.
Perfect. And that actually was part of, the second part of our discussion, which is really how, what kind of redressal mechanisms have you seen organizationally? I know the law prescribes something, right? Very clearly, you have to set up an internal committee. It has to follow a particular process, etc. But and for both of you, Kashmira and Delna, have you seen that this varies depending on the kind of organization it is, or is it all commonly understood now? Everybody knows this is it. This is the template. Everybody just has to follow, or do you see nuances or differences between, let's say, different types of organizations that are of different sizes, MNC versus an Indian corporation, etc., right? So, would love to hear from both of you if your thoughts in terms of if how you have seen that the implementation of the law and the redressal mechanism being sort of handled.
I think the IC is existing now for all types of organizations, right? Depending on the size, you may have local chapters and then, of course, a final IC that takes the final call on the investigation. But I think by and large, most companies and most people I've spoken to, everyone knows that you need an IC now. And that basic part is obviously already set quite well, I think, in most organizations. That's not whether it's
commonly understood.
It's a commonly understood thing.
Yeah,
how people implement it, how much they do in terms of awareness is very, very individualistic. I can say for us what works well, because we have employees in all parts of the country. Our employees don't always work in stores that are owned and run and managed by us. So they could be working in our retail partner stores as well, right? So how do we do the education? In our case, we have learned that having first instance responders sometimes works better. So these are people who are trained by the IC to respond to situations at a ground zero level before it is escalated, to help people, just understand, or also to be the people who decide to say that, yes, this must be informed to the IC or to HR immediately or not, depending on the situation. So to have more first instance reporters has really worked well in our case. They are sort of your ears to the ground. There are also people who are in more junior leadership, entry to level leadership roles. And people, for us in retail, people in the stores meet them more often, are more familiar with them. So even if they may hesitate to go to head of HR for something, they are more comfortable telling this person, this happened, how should I handle it?
Right.
And everything to do with harassment has to reach IC, right? There are a lot of instances that can be managed at a ground level in terms of just education. And we can talk about that more. Yeah. So the consideration of how do you manage situations? How do you help people understand, okay, if this happens, how do I respond? Because everything with IC reaches that point sometimes when there is like a dead end, right? It's already a big enough issue for someone to raise it. But a lot of times the first instance reporter can come to HR, to IC to say, this has happened. We need to talk to the person. She doesn't want to raise a complaint. But just because a person doesn't want to raise a complaint doesn't mean that there is no issue.
Right. It
So
could snowball into an issue at a later point of time.
It could snowball later. It could just be that the person feels like they are festering and they could leave the organization also, right? Not everyone raises a concern. So that's why I think it's good to use this tool that you have of first instance reporters across, especially if you're located in many places.
In fact, Delna, it's very, very interesting. We talk about the first instance responder or reporter in different ways. A lot of our workshops and trainings are focused on how managers have to be trained and sensitized to respond to a complaint that is coming into them. Because 9 out of 10 times, no matter how much you train people, the first escalation either goes to the individual's manager, the complainant's manager, or to HR. The IC is not really something that most people think of immediately, although now with training and sensitization that's happened over time, they have come around to that. So this is very interesting that in your organization you have set this up and trained by the IC so that they know what is it, how to handle situations, how to report up, how to let information flow up the chain in a manner that you are aware of it. Otherwise, most of the time, organizations are not aware of what's been happening. So that's actually very, very useful, and I'm hoping that from this discussion, more and more organizations hear and take this forward and implement this within their organizations. Kashmira, I want to bring you in here. You have a sort of, you were sharing your views as well with respect to how you have seen this evolve.
So one thing I think what has also changed, the earlier question that you asked is, one is that there are more women in the workforce, at least in the organized sector. Second is social media is something which has really sprung up now. So there's a lot of awareness, and even if organizations don't invest that much time or treat it like a tick box activity, however, because of social media, because of the networks that are there, which were not there earlier.
Yes.
There's a lot of information that is shared, and organizations are also aware there's a reputational risk. So even from that perspective, I think they have become much more serious and maybe sincere, I would say, towards this entire initiative. So having said that, what I also feel is that because of the yearly training that we have to do and the reinforcement, the ICC committee is getting that, education and orientation. Plus, also there are a group of people involved coming from different parts of the organization as well as outside. So that brings different perspectives, which otherwise maybe without the act, you may have had certain people, similar people being in the committee. So I think that's also a really good thing that you have a diverse committee. You are expected to have a diverse committee with external representation. And also I feel is because of this awareness which is happening, whether it's through your media or within the organization, I feel that the workforce today is also more vocal in a way. They would like to bring this up. And I was reading something interesting that it was there in one of the journals on organizational behavior and human decision making, where they actually shared that a lot of these instances are somewhere linked to power equations. That
of course.
You will see that it may be a person somewhat is holding some sort of power, whether it's position
of power,
or is someone you look up to, or it's a vendor, supplier. So, there is some sort of a power equation involved. And one of the ways to also mitigate this is to empower employees beyond just getting educated on PoSH, etc. Is to empower them that, speaking up, sharing your experiences, you have someone to go to who can, really help you address it. So I think what you shared is really good, that there are certain first respondents who are there beyond maybe even the line manager or HR. So that really gives them much more access to, different people. So I really feel that if we get the root cause somewhere is also linked to power. How is power perceived in the organization? Is it distributed? Is it held by few people? What happens when you sort of speak up? Are people encouraged to have open conversations? So a lot of this together will really help shift the needle, and not just PoSH compliance or training. That is definitely the tip of the iceberg. But I think, like Delna also said, inclusion, the whole mindset change, the way power is viewed or distributed within the organization, all that will make a difference in the long run for a safer workplace.
No, agreed, Kashmir. I think it's well established by now that the whole sexual harassment really is an abuse of power in that sense, and in most cases it is a person in a position of power that's really now that's misusing it, and that's yeah. So that fair point and a very powerful one as well. And I also realize, as both you and Delna were speaking, that first instance responder or reporter is also, the acronym is FIR. So I think it should be easy for you to take it within your organization and say, okay, file an FIR with the FIR, or go to your FIR or be an FIR, first instance reporter. So yeah, so definitely, I mean, in agreement with both of you. I think those are very solid points, which kind of is a segue into my next point in terms of and which I think goes back to what Delna also said earlier, which is training and awareness can really make a difference, right? Because once your workforce is trained, people know two things happen. One is, people know their rights, which is important, right? You know your rights as an individual, you know your rights as a professional, you know that if you are sexually harassed, this is what you can do, which I think is a very important aspect of training and sensitization. But what also happens is that people realize that uh, certain types of behavior are not acceptable at the workplace. And once they know, they will hopefully avoid. And I'm sure lots of instances of sexual harassment have been simply avoided or have not happened. We'll never know, right? Because people have never indulged in that behavior because they have been sensitized. But I think that's also an equally important aspect of what the law is providing, right? It allows it mandates training, awareness, and sensitization, and that I think is a very powerful aspect of this law. What I would like, to sort of hear from both of you is really what has your experience been on the training, awareness, and sensitization side? It's squarely within the framework of what HR is expected to do, right? Create awareness with respect to the law and the softer aspects as well. So, have you? What are the kind of challenges you've faced? What are the kind of situations where you find that even though the law is mandating this, it's still a challenge to get people to do what they're supposed to do? Kashmira, you want to go first with your experience and your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think what has worked well, I can start is one is that it brings everybody on the same page. So there's a
Yeah.
certain bit of consistency in the way you understand. So that's why you definitely, sort of need this sort of reinforcement to bring everybody on the same page, because you have a lot of new employees, first time people, you have straight from campus, etc. So you have to keep the rhythm going of really educating people as to this. So they are on the same page and there is no error, omission, commission later that, I did not know, I was not aware or fully aware, whatever. So that's the first step. So that really, I think what you said really helps bring people at that point. What else I've seen really work is stories and conversations. So definitely e-learning, and then you have a lot of other work, sort of training sessions you may do. But I think conversations and stories, whether it's in your organization or outside, really makes it stick much more, and people really remember and recall it much more than maybe a slide or a e-learning. So that is cognitive, but really this sort of makes them more aware and it connects emotionally. So I think that memory stays. So I've seen that has worked really well, that when maybe individual stories of where you had an observation about something or an experience or even whatever is available in the external world. So I think stories and conversations around that, where people are sharing their interpretation and inferences, that really helps bring more to the surface than maybe a e-learning or such a simple PowerPoint presentation. So that's one thing I've experienced. Second thing I've experienced is theater. I feel theater, and especially when you are dealing with an audience which is not comfortable, say in English or in a certain language, they're not fully comfortable, and you really want them to understand it in letter and spirit. So at that, I feel theater is something which connects very naturally with the audience. And I feel that really helps them stay with that whole messaging that you want to give. So I think these two things have really worked well in terms of training. And definitely now when I even have seen the Rainmaker module recently. So there's a lot of these elements which have got included there. So if you use it like a story, then people talk about it over, canteen conversations, coffee conversations. And this has happened even in my current organization, where after we did this whole sensitization through e-learning, actually people were talking that, about those themes and stories in the content. So I think that is something which will really be more powerful in terms of driving home the message, and also makes it stay more relevant and to the context. Because if you really go just by the act, then it's the same statements that you're repeating again and again. But with stories and conversations, you're adding that flavor and newness to the whole thing. So that's.
Well, thank you so much, Kashmira. That's absolutely, that's our philosophy: conversation, stories, emotional connects, and ensuring that the memories stay, which is really which is really the reason why we have created training modules that are short stories, right?
Correct.
People remember characters, people remember stories, and people then from that make an association that, okay, this kind of behavior is not acceptable. This I cannot do. This is all right, and so on and so forth. So yes, it is our
One point, Anthony.
yes, Kashmir.
Another thing what I've seen is that when, like for example, like safety, you start every meeting with a safety statistic or a safety briefing. So that drives home the message that, okay, safety
Correct.
is.
Correct.
Really when this becomes a part of language at the workplace.
Yes.
at the leadership level, or in various other, which is not that it is a PoSH training, but it is subtly woven into various other language rituals or processes where
Yes.
you use it. So then I think it further reinforces the message. So this has to complement the
Very much. Very much. Delna, similar experiences with you as well in terms of the training, sensitization, awareness. Also, post-COVID, more online or maybe more workshops which are virtual, etc. What's your experience been?
Yeah, I think everything that Kashmira says resonates. I've never tried the theater bit because of the level of education that we have. We've not really needed to go there. But definitely, like she said, with certain audiences, it's very powerful. I think one thing outside of the training that I have learned and implemented here is constant repetition. So while you know that when a person joins the organization, they sign your code of conduct, they sign your policy that they've read and understood it, then they go through a orientation. In our case, they also go through a online training. Having said all of that, we have a superficial memory when it comes to all this stuff that we've read and heard. And even if we've done a training, heard stories. So the repetition part is something that we really insist. So even though they don't have to go through a full training again, every quarter it is mentioned in the town halls. Every quarter we remind people of the grievance redressal process, whether it is your first instance responders, whether it is the helpline that you have or anything. We just keep doing this reiteration both via email as well as we speak about it on our town halls for our point of sales, to just remind everyone that this is something we take very seriously. It is part of the law, but it is also very, very important in our culture to have a safe working environment. And we want every single person to definitely come back and tell us if there is anything. And even if it is not a complaint, but it is something that makes you uncomfortable at the workplace, tell us what that is so that we can help resolve it. It doesn't have to wait till a point where it is a sexual harassment. Discomfort is enough to speak up. Sometimes even if it is discomfort because I don't know how to deal with this person. So it's not like I want my line manager out, but he did this one thing that made me feel uncomfortable. I don't know how to deal with it.
Right.
And even that we want you to tell us, because the whole idea is that we want you to come to the workplace feeling safe, feeling comfortable, feeling happy. So if you are not feeling any of these for any instance, come back to us.
Perfect. I think that really is sort of checks all the boxes in terms of what needs to be done, particularly from a training, sensitization, and awareness perspective. Changing track slightly, and Delna, I'd like to bring you in here. Retaliation or victimization, right? That is something that I believe is an aspect that both HR as well as internal committees are still grappling with somewhat, in the sense that it's human nature, right? You tend to somebody's filed a complaint against you or against someone you are close to, and naturally there's a tendency that, okay, fine, I have to. I mean, maybe conscious, subconscious, but there will be a bias against that individual for having done what they did, or against a witness for having honestly and truthfully testified, right? And these are all very critical aspects in an ongoing internal committee investigation.
Yes.
Is this something that both of you have seen? How have you handled it? How do you encourage a culture where it's all right to speak up and you don't have to worry about sort of any repercussions, fear of retaliation, and so on and so forth? So, Della, if you could start with you on this one, your
Yes.
experience in this domain.
Yes. So I think, like you said, it's natural, right? There might be an unconscious bias or actually a bias, because retaliation, the fear of retaliation for everyone is real.
Yeah.
So yes, I might speak up, but then what are the repercussions I will face at the workplace? The only way to change that is to constantly, when you're talking about zero tolerance, also talk about zero tolerance in terms of retaliation for anyone who speaks up. That's one part of that takes care only of one part. The second, could there actually be a complaint that is of a serious nature and it involves more people? The confidentiality clause has to be constantly reminded, because you need to contain the situation and you don't want everyone talking about it outside till it is proven, because it is also the reputation of the complaint the complainant and the complainee, and you have to keep it within a tight ICC control. And there as well, at each instance, you have to remind people why it's important. So not just that there will be repercussions, but why is it important to keep the confidentiality needs to be explained to everybody at every point, including witnesses, of course. And I think for me, the third point, which for me is the most important, is this again has to start with leadership talking about it. It has to start by saying that no matter who you are in the organization, you will be dealt with in the same way, respectfully, the way the law requires, but the investigation and the level of detail, the level of what is required will be the same. So even when we talk about the PoSH case, even my country head general manager, when he says it doesn't matter who it is, if there is tomorrow a complaint against me, the process will be the same. So to reiterate this, that it is not about who raises it, you are protected, and the company will do everything it takes to protect the person who's complained, but as well as to do a fair investigation, is something you have to again reinforce and talk about it from the topmost level.
That needs to, again, part of
Culture building.
The leadership setting the tone from the top.
Yeah. And it's not just for PoSH. For us,
Yeah.
the leadership conversations start. We have something called leadership at your service, which means it could be anything. So we even have leadership at your service cards physically available in the office, available to anyone who wants to make an appointment, irrespective of hierarchy. If there is a PoSH case on us, is separate. You have a point of sales employee sitting in, I don't know, anywhere in any part of the country, and tomorrow they feel they want 15 minutes with someone from a leadership team for any conversation, they have this available to them, that they can reach out via email, via WhatsApp, or via this leadership at your service card.
That's fascinating. Leadership
that
at your
we
service.
want. Yeah, so we have leadership at your service, and we do believe that we are here to serve you, right? So if you want time for us, we will make that time, and then the onus is on the leadership team member who receives this request to set up a meeting and to talk to them and to get back within 48 hours. So
Wonderful.
Maybe the meeting is not possible within 48 hours sometimes, but at least to get back saying, yes, I have your request, and then we will mutually find a time to speak. And I think that's just time, no matter who you are in the organization. Also then opens up the mindset that yes, I can go, and it is a safe space to speak, whether it is about my career conversation, about an issue with a line manager, may not necessarily be about harassment, but just the conversation and the opening up of that in terms of being a more inclusive culture for us stems from there. So we made a lot of effort in doing many other things, not just for PoSH, but many other things to have this kind of a culture.
Perfect, and I think that is. I've made a note of leadership at your service. I think it's wonderful. It's a great initiative, and it really, apart from making leadership more accessible, it also lends an air of humility to the whole leadership team. Makes them, more accessible. As I already said, I think it's just fantastic. Really, a great takeaway from this discussion.
So it's like this, we have these cards lying around office, and then it has like this thing filled at the back.
The free text box, yeah.
Free text box, leadership team member you want to meet, your name, your phone number, and if you're comfortable, the topic you want, how do you want it? Do you want a virtual discussion? Are you more comfortable coming to office and doing the discussion? And then we just leave them around, and people fill it out. You see them on your desk. There are also boxes where if you want to meet 2 or 3 people and you don't know where to leave it, then we have a box where we go and keep checking if anyone's left it. So it works quite well, especially for new people who don't know you so well. They may not be comfortable directly coming to you. They use this as a sort of tool to break the ice.
Because this way, the leader has to reach out. So it kind of helps with the ice breaking. You don't feel intimidated as a junior employee to maybe even reach out. Rather, they are going to reach out to you and say, "Hey, listen, come, let's chat."
Yeah, so
wonderful
that
initiative.
works. Yeah.
So, Kashmira, what's been your experience in terms of anti-retaliatory measures? What has been your experience in dealing with retaliation and victimization? Also, I'm sort of the fact that Nosal is a listed company. Have you felt that there is a sort of greater sense of obligation to comply with the law, put in place best practices? You also have now the BRSR regulations. So how has this impacted sort of your approach to dealing with PoSH, anti-retaliation measures, etc.
So I think some of the things that Delna shared are really great, and definitely leadership as service is something all of us could, start within our organization in some way. What I really feel is within NOSIL, I think the promoter philosophy is very strong. I think for 118 years for the promoter, like the whole group is about 118 years, and NOSIL is here for 60 odd years. So the philosophy in terms of, really respecting employees, caring for them, it starts from there. So that has, and service. So I think these three are really deeply rooted, right from our leader, Mr. Arvind Patlar, to his son, to the generations that followed, and also the leadership that they sort of created in terms of empowering professionals to really run the course. So I think that has been really useful because they've always had professionals from IIT and reputed institutes who are really helping affairs within the organization, and also the partnership with other MNC companies like Share and Hext from even much before when JVs were a norm or were in vogue, if I were to say, it was happening here. So I think a lot of that influence has really subtly shaped the culture in a very positive way towards respect, service, inclusion, care, being honest, transparent. So a lot of those things really help in implementing, say, PoSH or any other compliance or a legal mandate. What also I think in terms of, yes, in my experience, there has been some retaliation in pockets. It has happened. And so there are two views I have. One, when your other people processes are strong and individuals have mentors or career anchors or certain go-to people who they trust and rely on within the organization, it becomes easier to manage or mitigate the risk of retaliation, victimization. However, if the other processes are not really conducive and strong, then it becomes that much more difficult to really maybe protect someone or shield someone from such type of measures. So what I really agree with Delna that your other processes have to be strong or stronger to really make this work. Well, it's a very sensitive topic. It is someone who's being very vulnerable by coming forward. And given the context of our country, the whole environment within or outside the organization, there's still, we are not like that bold and vocal, maybe as some of our developed counterparts or nations. So I think it's really important that they have seen certain role modeling, they have seen the consequences in other forums, whether it's a town hall or it is in other team meetings, in your meetings, in your performance dialogues. If they have felt safe and they could and trusted in those type of environments, then it becomes that much more easier to make this work in letter and spirit. So I think it has to be complemented by everything else. That's
absolutely. And I realize that we are sort of almost running out of time. So I wanted to cover up one more aspect before we throw the field open for questions. And the interplay between prevention of sexual harassment and creating a more culture of compliance, a culture of respect, diversity, equity, inclusion, and now belonging, as they say, right? Um, eh, More and more organizations, something that we at Rainmaker have always sort of spoken about, right? That you cannot address PoSH in isolation. You cannot say that sexual harassment, prevention of sexual harassment is now mandated by law. And therefore, you need to do what you need. This is a legal requirement, and you need to comply. Rather, it is going to be far more effective if every organization actually, also take steps to create a more diverse and inclusive workplace, one that is fair, equitable, and create a sense of belonging amongst the people. The minute you have a respectful workplace, automatically you will find that instances of sexual harassment at the workplace are also decreasing, right? Because they sort of complement each other. So this is something that we are seeing a lot of organizations now focusing on, right? Sort of getting, a PoSH compliance and training program in place, along with, or sort of together with also sensitizing the workforce with respect to the organization's DEI journey, as well as creating more inclusive workplaces or workspaces. I'd love to hear from both of you as HR professionals who sort of with rich experience. Is this something that you are seeing in the industry, in your respective organizations? would love to hear your thoughts on this.
So yes, definitely seeing what you are sharing, and it's much more stronger now. However, I also feel that there's a lot of responsibility on the government as well as organizations to really be an advocate of this change. So I think what I really feel is that if we start at a younger age, like we have a lot of students who are after they become adult, they go for their undergrad, they go for their postgrad. So sensitization from that level will really help them when the workforce comes into the organization. They're that much more aware. So that just helps because they're going to be the future workforce. So if they come in aware, so that much more stronger you can make the whole intent and drive to make it a safer, more inclusive workplace. So I think a lot of work that can begin from there, and even corporates and educational institutes can make it one of the industry academia things that they may want to work on, which is inclusion and compliance and the culture, which then really helps you in terms of the people you get on board in future.
Right.
The other thing which I feel is that it has to go hand in hand. You need to drive culture compliance together, and eventually compliance becomes a part of the culture. So you don't have to do it separately. It just becomes a way of working. It's a part of your fabric as you move forward.
It becomes a culture of compliance.
Yeah, like you said, it becomes a culture of compliance. So I definitely feel that, and I feel another thing which I feel is maybe we all are reporting what we individually do, but collectively how it's moving the needle, what's happening in the whole macro environment. In terms of that, I feel if there's a bit more reporting and awareness, even for us who are driving it within our organization, it will help us be much more mindful, and intent will be much more stronger. So I think that are some of the things that could be definitely much more strong.
Understood. Fair point. Delna, how about you? Has your experience also been similar?
Yes, but a culture of compliance for me is possible only if there is a culture of respect.
Absolutely.
Right? A culture of respect will come when you start teaching inclusion and how diversity is important, not just at a workplace, in your classroom, in school. It doesn't have to wait till you get into an organization, right? So as soon as you start teaching someone that inclusion just begins at home, it begins with your friends, it begins everywhere else, because you may not agree with another person's idea or philosophy or anything of that sort, but you have to still respect it. And that's what I say, even when we are talking about LGBTQ as a community, right? It doesn't matter what you feel about it. It doesn't matter what your personal choice is. The fact is you have to respect that person for who they want to be in their lives and at the workplace. So the intent is, if you teach people respect and you teach them the value of inclusion at the workplace, in their lives in general, outside of the workplace, it will automatically then culminate into a culture of compliance, because awareness and education are the two pillars that will support inclusion. And then that will lead into having and fostering a better working environment across the board. Today we're talking about PoSH, but it could be anything else, right? It could be tomorrow a matter of another form of harassment. If you start teaching respect, I think that is the core behind the change that we want to see, in society and at the workplace.
That reminded me of a statement where I may not agree with what you have to say, but I will defend to death your right to say it. And I think a right culture of respect means that everybody has. You may not agree with a person's view, but you definitely will. You have to give them that much leeway and that much respect. That okay, fine. You are entitled to your view. I am entitled to mine, and we both can sort of speak our minds, of course subject to reasonable restrictions as our constitution says. But okay, so wonderful. I think I'm very mindful that we're almost at the end of this wonderful discussion, but we have a fair bit of questions, and I want to try and get through as many of them as possible today, before we all run out of time. So we have a question for both panelists. What are your thoughts on having an anonymous feedback complaint box? Would it be workable? Would it be a workable solution for safe workplaces, or would it do more harm than good?
I believe any complaints that come in, anonymous or otherwise, are good, because it lets you know about the climate of the organization, and it's good to know. In case of sexual harassment, anonymous complaints don't help because you don't know what else you can do. You don't know where it's coming from. You don't know what action to take. However, you know it's happening. So then you can at least decide if you want to reiterate your policy again, do a general awareness exercise. But anyone who's raising anything anonymous must know that you can't really take action.
Yeah.
So I don't want to stop the channel of information coming in because anonymous or not, it's good to know. But action is not always possible out of an anonymous complaint.
Yeah, especially within the PoSH law framework, which mandates that you have to sort of
give a written complaint. Yeah.
Give a written complaint. So fair enough. All right, Kashmira, do you have anything to add to that?
I agree with just that we should have pick-up channels, which like a toll-free number or an email ID, which is accessed just by a neutral person. So I think, especially in my multinational organizations, I've seen that it has worked well. Because they have somebody who is not at all, sort of directly involved in operations. So
yeah,
I think that really helps. Yeah.
The second question, thank you both so much. What initiatives can an organization take to ensure that even a blue-collar employee or worker will have the courage and accessibility to file a formal complaint of sexual harassment? I think probably a sort of issue, intersectionality issue in terms of where you are and whether you feel emboldened or you feel protected enough to be able to actually file a complaint, especially if you're a blue-collar worker working in a remote factory setting. So would love to hear from both of you on that.
So I think it is definitely possible, but it really depends on how you're educated, that ecosystem of the factory and the organization. So if I can give you my example, in all my previous companies, we are manufacturing organizations here in India. And we definitely educate at the same level and intensity. Even our contract workers are working with us, whether it is also our union colleagues. So all of them are educated at the same level, with the same intensity, with the similar tools, maybe in different languages. So they have really been part of the whole conversation and change right from the start. So I think that really helps in creating that environment.
I just want to add on top of that, first instance responders, right? So in that factory, if they know that if something like this is there, I can go and have this talk with this person or that person. Doesn't have to be like, oh, I have to go to HR or I have to go to this senior person. That first instance reporter could be a supervisory staff in that same factory who they knows better than them and trust that person, right? So when you choose first instance responders, you have to choose people who have their ears to the ground, but who are also respected and trusted and valued in the community that they serve. And that really helps raise and be able for people who may be lower down in the hierarchy or blue collar, as we call it, doesn't matter who, they feel safe with that person. That will automatically give them the courage to speak about it.
Fair points. All fair points. Thank you. I'm mindful of time. How many more questions can I take? 1, 2, 3. How are you both doing so far? We have a fair bit of questions, but I realize that we don't have too much time. So I'll be guided by whatever works for both of you.
A lot of the questions that I saw also had an underlining question on confidentiality.
Confidentiality. So maybe we can pick that up as a theme.
Yeah, we can pick that up.
Sure.
And there was one question that I read about how do we cultivate a culture of respect, or one or two initiatives. I think a culture of, I'll answer that in a minute quickly if you don't mind. A culture of respect can't be created immediately. A culture of respect has to start with first encouraging and leading by example, that you treat each other with respect, and that trickles down then across the organization. So if you have, say, in FMCG or retail, an area manager who goes into a store or a shop or a mall and is not respectful towards his team, then you cannot expect that team to feel that the culture of respect exists. So it has to be done at all levels of the organization. It takes time. And then as senior leadership, you have to have zero tolerance towards people who are disrespectful. Right. So I know people who join us from different organizations and they say that, no, but on the shop floor, that's how you have to talk, or people don't understand. And I always say that's the first thing you have to stop doing, because if you talk like that at Estee Lauder, you'll be out. No matter whether you're right or wrong, that's not how you talk. You can give feedback nicely, respectfully, nicely, and respect the individual, right? Because we are giving feedback to the individual about their work, not about their character. So if you start doing that education at a line manager level, respect will trickle down. It's not about initiatives that you can do to. Everything is possible with respect. Any amount of stern feedback is possible with respect, but it has to be done like that. And then you'll build a culture. It won't happen with an initiative.
Absolutely spot on, Delna. In fact, one of the things that we cover in our workshops is when you give feedback, keep it respectful, keep it professional, never make it personal.
Exactly.
So a lot of managers tend to say, oh, what do I expect from somebody of your background, where you come from, the kind of college you went to? They're disparaging of different aspects of a particular profession, right? Which can be extremely hurtful, demotivating, and so on and so forth. So
and unnecessary. It's just unnecessary.
totally unnecessary, because that is not the point. If you want to make the point that you need to improve as a professional, then you're totally going about it the wrong way. So agree 100%. Kashmira, you had something to
just
add.
one more addition to this is one is how do you define respect in terms of behaviors? Well, everybody feels that I am respectful, but it's part of also our DNA as Indians that yes, respect. But how do you really define respect? And respect is also allowing people to differ with you. Respect is also allowing other person to share their view and you hear them. So you're only to define respect within the workplace. And also, I think a lot of this is to do with maybe unconscious, conscious bias. So a lot of focus on that will really help maybe people be more aware of themselves and then show up that much more better in the workplace.
Yeah, we always say that you're spot on, Kashmira. We always say that you can never completely eliminate unconscious biases. What you need to be is mindful of your bias and check your bias as appropriate, right? So totally agree with you. On confidentiality, very quickly, if both of you could share your inputs on how to in maybe create a culture of confidentiality in the sense of if a complaint has gone to the IC, then the need to keep it confidential and to ensure that the identity of both the parties are protected and it's not fodder for gossip. It's not meant to be spoken about, whether you're an IC member or a witness or even one of the two parties.
Yeah. So I think that's just something you have to reiterate. It's not, people talk, you can't really stop it. You just have to reiterate it. Obviously, as an IC, you know that you have to maintain confidentiality. And assuming the IC will, whether it's witnesses, complainant, complainee, at every investigation, every interaction that you have with them, the confidentiality clause, like I'd mentioned earlier also, has to be reminded of. You have to remind them that non-confidentiality is not only a breach of trust to the IC, but it is also a form of retaliation. And we do not tolerate retaliation, and that's zero tolerance. So if we find out that there is non-confidentiality, we will not take the complaint forward, right? Because that is also a form of retaliation. So that's something you need to keep reminding people and do it to the best of your ability. There's no 100% way in which you can protect it. When there are people will talk. You just have to remind them that it's something that will not be tolerated.
And if something comes to your notice, how you respond to it.
Exactly.
For others to follow. So I think that's what we can really do is educate, tell them what they're signing up for, and then how you respond to things, that is important.
Absolutely, Kashmira. So I think if you both agree, we'll take just the two last questions. I'm seeing so many interesting questions, but I realize that if you're both fine with it, I'd like to take two more questions and then we can close. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Perfect. So the first question I think is for Delna. You have worked both in an Indian company like the Taj Group and MNCs like Estee Lauder. Do you see any difference in terms of compliance and culture? And Delna, totally your call whether you would want to, if you're comfortable enough answering this question.
I think when I worked in the Taj, it was pre the PoSH law. And when I worked in Estee Lauder, I implemented it here. So I think it was a different time. I think in terms of code of ethics, both the companies are very similar in terms of the ethical code of conduct of putting the employee at everything at the center of what you do. So in my case, I don't think it's a fair comparison because I don't know how the Taj manages PoSH. So I think it's not right for me to say it. Like it was a pre-PoSH era when I was there versus now.
All right. And one more, the total number of sexual harassment complaints at workplaces climbed by 27% in the financial year ending March 22 compared to the previous year. And one of the PoSH experts says it is due to workforce coming back to office. So the surge is apparently attributed to coming back to office. Although I had heard this that during COVID, cases had surged in some companies because online harassment had gone up. Now, I guess back at the workplace, in-person harassment is going up. So the question is, does this incentivize organizations choosing hybrid or more of a work from home for its employees, or virtual harassments are not yet getting registered? So,
I think I would answer it differently. I think it's a good welcome to see numbers going up, because when numbers go up, I don't look at it as harassment. I look at it as reporting has increased, right?
absolutely.
And when
Absolutely.
reporting increases, are increasing. I don't think that the hybrid policy we have, we would choose basis this, at least not for my organization. But harassment in both forms will continue to be possible, will continue to exist. It's how we adapt and how we do the education and awareness again in both scenarios. But to me, there's no connection between a hybrid workforce and the PoSH rules that come in.
There's a direct correlation between awareness and cases, probably. Correct. But definitely not in terms of what the workplace is. Agreed, agreed, Delna. Kashmira, what about you?
I agree that I also feel there maybe people are reporting more. Maybe they are much more aware, much more bolder. We don't know. So maybe we can also link it to that the reporting is going on because of awareness and people are having more courage. Organizations are giving a much more safer space for people to report. I would also not correlate it to the workplace in terms of the physical or hybrid or virtual.
Yeah. Agreed. Fair enough. Thank you so much, both. And would you any sort of closing comments that you have for the audience? And remember, we're also going to be putting this out on YouTube. So I'm sure everybody who's going to view the video is going to learn a lot. I have learned a lot. I've made so many notes from our conversation. So thank you both very much. Any closing comments before we end the call?
So just a couple. One is that being legally literate is really important for all of us. And we should do it also for our workforce, for our family, etc. So we can be messengers, ambassadors, not only within the organization. And second is because of this whole discussion, it also helped me take a pause and reflect that, am I doing enough? So I think that's something for me to take away and think about.
Thank you. Thank you, Kashmira. Delna, how about you?
I think for me, this law has always been about how do you keep influencing your culture so that we reduce anyone feeling uncomfortable at the workplace. And we also reduce the instances of people thinking they have the liberty to behave like this, whether in a position of power or otherwise. And I think both of them can stop by two things. One, reiterating the stand that you will take if something like this happens, and educating people about their rights. Because once there is education and awareness, you already empower people to speak up.
Wonderful. On that very positive note, I want to thank you both, Kashmira and Delna. Thank you so much for your time. I frankly didn't realize time flying by. It's been a little more than an hour, but it's been such an engaging conversation. I've learned so much, such a rich conversation that, and I'm sure more of the folks who were on the call, as well as those who will view the video later, are also going to benefit from it. So a big thank you to both of you for taking time out from your busy schedules to make time for this discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anthony. Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And for a reminder for all of you folks, we have the last episode of our webinar series at 5 p.m. We have a conversation with Karuna Nandi, Supreme Court advocate and international lawyer. That promises to be a very interesting one as well. So do stay logged in, or at least log back in at 5 p.m. for that conversation. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kashmira. Thank you,
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.